3. Welcome one and all to the greatest code show on earth, or maybe the second or third greatest. I'm sure Simulated Greg will disagree with me. This is the Daily Code, episode 13, and today, although it's going to be a bit of a shorter stream, we're going back to Icicle, because I was having such a lot of fun yesterday with Eris and things just working, and I remembered back to the dark old days of Friday, when I was having trouble with Icicle and concurrency and just generally getting good performance out of it, that I thought I'd revisit this. And I played around with it a little bit earlier and found out maybe I was just benchmarking incorrectly. So let's have a look at this. The theme. The theme is that we are going to be putting together a proxy API. I really enjoy putting together PHP APIs because it's a very pure sort of thing to do. Being able to just not worry about interfaces and browsers and being able to just do raw logic, and mostly that's about the database and about third-party services and about formatting and caching and nonsense, but it's kind of a very pure thing to do. And my boss, Sam, today was doing a little bit of API work, and I tried to distract him valiantly because it was fun to do. And turns out he actually got to do quite a few cool things. He got to use generators to make SDK stuff better. He got to connect to a third-party JSON API and do interesting things with that. So I thought I'd do that. And initially, I was just going to take a static SDK and convert it to an asynchronous SDK using Icicle or Eris or something like that. In the end, I decided I would make an API just straight in Icicle because it's fun. So let's do that. Starting off, I'm actually in the wrong place. This is the API I'm going to deal with today. It is the GitHub JSON API. And I'm not going to do a comprehensive SDK for this, but what I want to do is I want to try and set up a PHP-based, event loop-based API that does interesting things with GitHub data. It's not just a copy of the GitHub API, but it consumes parts of it and formats that and creates relationships and provides statistical information. So maybe I can do other interesting things like code review or general quality per user or something like that. I don't know. So this is the API I'm going to dig into. And this is the API I'm going to dig into. And I've gone ahead and I've downloaded Icicle.io HTTP. So something like Composer require Icicle.io HTTP. That's the first thing. The second thing I've downloaded is Nikix FastRoute, whatever. Yes, I am hireable null in my GitHub API. By the way, this is completely unauthenticated request, so all of this info you see here you can get just by going to github.com/assertchris, or whatever your username is. All the information that is available through here, including email address and location, company and stuff, is available in this API because it's completely unauthenticated. And I'm not going to look at doing any requests to endpoints that would be protected by authentication because I'm not really fussed about that. I'm more concerned with just showing public data. So I've done those things, right? What I want to do is I want to have just a server.php file. We're going to set up a very quick HTTP Icicle server. And so to do that, let's go over to the examples of Icicle's HTTP client and just go raw. I'm going to copy and paste this HTTP server example and then clean it up a little bit. Wow, that's really slow. Okay. So we'll just take the HTTP server directly. Wow, close the sidebar. There we go. Okay. And we can clean it up a little bit. For instance, I'm not really fussed about this stuff over here. And we can convert these quotes. I don't want to do an echo server, so I'm just going to delete all of this because I really don't care about the body. I'll rename this from sync to stream because that's more in keeping what I'm going to use this for. Stream. Let's replace some quotes. Ooh. By the way, the hotkeys for this is PHP Storm. The hotkeys that I'm pressing now, Alt-Enter, brings up this quick instructions menu, so I can do replace quotes, And if there are embedded quotes, it'll replace them quite intelligently, which is pretty cool. This also lets you do other things like, if you make a class, for instance, foo. If you do Alt-Enter on this, no, my mistake. Let's make a function. That I know will work. Public, oh my gosh, public function construct. Okay, so if you do Alt-Enter on this, it'll give you some shortcuts. It's one of the key combinations to do shortcuts in PHP Storm. So for instance, the only shortcut it knows how to do on an empty function with no parameters is generate PHP doc. And that's what it'll do. It's a cool shortcut to know about. There are other ones which I don't have a use for right now, like for instance, Control-T for the refactoring menu, which this lets you extract methods and parameters. It's pretty rad. Anyway, we can shorten this up a bit by yield new response. If you were watching the streams last week, some of this may be repetitive, I'm sorry, but I wanted to start off with a full code example so that anyone who wasn't watching those can follow along. I'll set the port to listen to be 8000, and we run the loop. Let's just do some formatting, some more key combinations. Okay. That's actually pretty cool. I've set up, I've remapped the code formatting stuff in PHP Storm. There can be a method in an API. Oh, burn basket method. I don't know. If you have PHP Storm and you do command comma, in fact command comma works in Atom for preferences as well, you can go to editor, code style, and you can expand this. And this is code style for all the languages that PHP Storm supports out the box. So if we go to PHP, for instance, I've mapped all the settings to make this compatible with PSR2, but you can see there are things like how things wrap, where things put spaces. You know, this kind of thing's pretty cool. You can put together a whole code scheme that when you press Alt-Command-L, I think it is by default, it'll format all the code according to this. So for instance, I've got things like sort this alphabetically, and then it'll do that, which is pretty rad. So I've got that default code scheme stuff in PHP Storm. I've also got, I've also mapped another external tool. If I go to tools here, I'll just show you what this is, because it's kind of useful to me when I see other people's tools and work out what they're doing. So, what did I call this? Tools, external tools, and then I made one called PHP CS Fixer. And this plugs into the command line utility that I've got installed, PHP CS Fixer, which, if you're on a Mac, you can install through brew.sh. Okay, there's a whole long story here, okay? If you're on a Mac and you do any serious development, install Homebrew. Go to brew.sh and install it with this, or, you know, there's like a longer step for if you don't trust this just curling into sudo. But anyway, install this. This gives you a package manager, dependency manager called Homebrew. And in this you can search for all sorts of things like different PHP versions or PHP extensions. And you can install them through this. Where was I going with this? Good question. I don't know if Atom does do everything that PHP Storm does, but I have seen a package or two that does a little bit of a formatting, so check that out. Anyway, Homebrew. You can install with Homebrew, brew install, PHP CS Fixer. And this, I'm not going to install it now because it's already installed, but this gives you a set of automated tools to format your code according to the PSR2 standard. So everything that PHP Storm doesn't do to get my code to PSR2, this will. Pretty cool. And you don't need PHP Storm to use this. You can use it on a directory of code and say the level you want, or give it a custom schema, and it will format code in that. You can also do dry runs to see what it's going to change before it changes it. But that's pretty rad. So I'm using PHP Storm's formatters for some things. I'm using PHP CS Fixer for other things, and generally my code's pretty fun. Okay, that was a super sidetrack. Simple API, PHP index. Brew. 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 What did I call this? Server. Server.php. Okay, another thing to note is that at the moment, because I was doing errors yesterday, I have PHP 7 bound, and I upgraded it overnight to RC6, which means the performance stuff that you see now is the benchmark stuff is going to be PHP 7 that's benchmarking this, not PHP 5.5. Yeah, exactly. It's totally possible, hey? PHP CS Fixer uses Nicic's PHP parser library, which is pretty good. Nicic is actually, Nikita Popov is actually the person who put the AST in PHP 7. And this is his tool that PHP CS Fixer uses to deconstruct and to reformat. So this is pretty much it. I mean, the difference is that Go's a compiled thing, and that's when it applies the formatting, or like depending on the tooling, it'll apply the formatting on save. Whereas this isn't wired into any IDE unless you wire it yourself. So I have, and I can do a keyboard combination and it'll save it. Is this PHP CS Fixer you're talking about? You can hook it in. You can hook Fixer into Grunt or Gulp just by doing like a shell command. I mean, you can do it yourself. Like you can say PHP CS Fixer. I'm just going to do a dry run, but fix src, and that doesn't exist. Fix the root route. Okay, so it says. I mean, I ran a dry run, so it's telling me the file it would change. I can't remember exactly what the commands are to see a detailed breakdown of what it's going to fix. Probably, I don't know. Oh, probably something like fix help. What will that do? Goodness, that's lots of docs. These are all things you can enable or disable on this. Anyway, you can run this from the command line. It's pretty easy to do. Let's go back to our server. I want to see this thing working. Okay. So, default request, just returning a string wrapped in a stream as a response. Okay, hello world. Let's see how quick this is. I want to benchmark this stuff right from the beginning. So, AB, a concurrency of 100 requests at a time, number of requests 15,000, and keep alive. And this must go to the root. Now this is running slightly slower than it was earlier because while I'm streaming I'm doing a live encode, so that takes a lot of system resources. I can check at the moment the encoder is taking roughly a third of my CPU usage. But if we go back here, we can see 660 requests a second, which is miles faster than what it was before, even while it's live encoding, which is pretty good. Okay, so it's not doing something significant at the moment. How could we make that? How could we make that better? Well, we could do some templates rendering in here. We could do some file I/O in here. I don't want to do those things because it's not particularly relevant to making an API. But what I will do is I'll add a router in here. So going to my example code that I had earlier and switching back very quickly so you can't see what's going on. Let me just increase the font size here because this is, I think the font size is a little bit small. Let's see, colors and fonts, font. Better? This music, eh? Whatever. Okay, so if you were here on Friday, you'll remember we tinkered around with FastWrite to get it to work. And basically I discovered I need to put this dispatch on the outside to save on resources and use it inside to do the actual dispatching. So this is how you use FastWrite. In fact, the example code shows you to do this, and then it says something like collector, add route, and then you do stuff like this, right? And a callback at the end. Whoa. And then this callback's returned when it's dispatched, and you can work all that stuff out. In the meantime, I'm just requiring a file within this function, so that in that routes file, which I haven't got yet, I can start defining routes separately. Routes.php. So this follows a similar setup to frameworks or application frameworks like Laravel or Symfony or CodeIgniter or whatever. code igniter, hey? Okay, so we have, because of where this include is, we have collector already defined, and we can say add route, get, I'm just defining a root route. Okay, so we can start to move stuff in here. For instance, I'm going to make sure that each route has access to exactly the same as what gets given for each intercepted request. Okay, and I'll show you how that works. It's not a huge thing. But then we can move this stuff in there as well, because this is just enough for one route. We don't really want to have this in our server hard-coded. We can move it here. That's fine. Oh, also, if you do any PHP stuff like using Silex or Slim, this is kind of like that. Feels kind of like that. To be able to embed responses to requests within callbacks and match them to a route and a request method. Okay, what are we doing here? We go to the example code and copy all of that. I'll explain what this does again, so don't worry. Okay, so we set the dispatcher up outside this generator function, but we pass a reference to it inside so that we can dispatch each request according to its method and its request target. We have these from Icicle's request interface, so we can check what the request method that the browser sent is. We can check what the path is that the browser requested in this domain. And then what we get back from that has a few states. It can be not found. It can be that the route was found, but they were requesting against a method that's not allowed for that route. So, you know, if they're requesting a post to the homepage and the homepage doesn't support that. Or it can be found, in which case we yield whatever this is. But what is that? Well, in our routes file, we have the yield keyword. So this function becomes a generator, or at least a function that makes a generator. So we call this and we get back a generator. We're also sending the request on the socket, just like we received here, because this route callback expects those. And we're sending the third index of this dispatched array, which is for if we had any custom things here, like user or any kind of regular expression, that would come in that parameter. So we would have, at the end here, we would have an array of parameters, and by default that will just be empty. But if we had any named parameters here, if someone supplied /1, we would have an associative array where the key is user and the value is 1. We'd have that as that last parameter, but we're not using this right now, so it will go unused, whatever. Okay, let's restart the server and see if this works. Not there. Oh, not there either. That one. Whoa! What's wrong? Icicle API routes. Routers is probably the wrong thing. Routes. Okay. That didn't look like it worked. Oh, okay. So I know what the problem is here. We're requiring these interfaces, but we don't actually have the namespaces here. So I'll copy this in there, and I'll just format this. Okay, why do I have this, and why do I have this? I don't need those. Also, we can remove the stuff in here. So this is nice and clean, and the routes file is nice and clean. Let's run the server again. Error, class memory sync. Oh. Okay, so we have this back again. Let's benchmark. The previous time, well, the previous performance was 662 requests a second, and generally these were very fast. 50% of them 137 milliseconds or less. Shush man, I'll change it. I think this is slightly a different artist. I don't know, Greg, I don't know if you're being serious or not. It's difficult for me to know. Okay, so we've dropped by 662 down to 551. Okay, so about 110 requests a second down, given the other system considerations. It's not the best, but it is a nicer interface to use for a larger application. So now we're not doing a whole bunch of stuff in here. This will largely remain unchanged, but we're doing more stuff in here, and adding the router on top is slowing this down a little bit. That's fine. Look, serving 600 requests a second. That's pretty good, I think. Now there's another thing. There's another thing. There's another thing. Okay. I had this other server which I coded up earlier. And what I actually want to do is I want to change this to text JSON. And I want to JSON encode a response. Okay. I want to launch a completely separate server. I'll delete... No, I'll leave that example stuff there. What's going on? Why have I got an error here? Whatever. I don't know. I'll put this... Whoa, what did I just do there? I'll put this at a separate place. I'll say this is at 8010, 8010, whatever. And what did I call this? Proxy API, proxy... Around slime 12. Yeah. I'll figure it out sooner or later. Okay, another bracket. I have this separate setup, which is now hosted at 127.0.0.1.80.10. And the default will return some JSON data. It's not that the bench... I'm not really comparing Eris to Icicle, although yesterday's performance of the Eris server was quite good, like really good. What I'm doing is I'm using them as a way to determine how much I'm slowing the server down by doing extra stuff. Because, I mean, you know, 600 requests a second, that's more than I'm going to get on any personal site that I set up. But if I add in something and the performance goes from 600 requests a second to 50 requests a second, I know I'm doing something really wrong. So it's not that I'm comparing them, and it's not even that I'm comparing performance on my machine to performance in the wild. It's that I'm comparing performance from one state of the application to another. It's just to make sure that I don't screw the application up too much. Because what I got into last week, where I ended on Icicle, was actually pretty bad, because I'd gone and I had added a template engine, I'd added some file I/O stuff, and the code was looking great, but I started with okay performance, which I didn't measure. And I ended with really bad performance, but I didn't know how bad compared to what I started with. I had no way to analyze how adding template parsing and how adding file I/O was slowing the application down. So now I'm just benchmarking as much as possible so I can see, okay, now I've added a router, how much has this slowed the application down by? Like 10%, 50%? That's the purpose of benchmarking. But that was a very good remark. And performance isn't really abysmal on this. It's faster than using... You know, this is still faster than using, on my local machine, using Apache or Nginx and Laravel. Just because of how it's structured. Just because of how it's structured, right? Like event-based architectures just allow concurrency. Better. Whatever. Was that like a sufficient sidetrack? Anyway. I have the separate server running up at 8010 because I want to go into this thing that we've been working with, and I want to make some requests to an API. I don't want to make them against the GitHub API right now because I'm worried if I start doing that they're going to block me for, you know, they're going to restrict me, and there are rate limits and stuff in place which I don't want to trigger off. I just want to request against the local system because, again, I want to see what this is like when I start adding client requesting without cache, which is going to be abysmal. Then I'll move on to doing something with cache and make it better and better. Does that make sense? I'm glad. I just want to do some quick stuff. Okay, so I'll call this endpoint JSON, and I have an example of how to do this request on my previous dev stuff that I was doing. So make this stuff. It's probably not a very efficient way of doing this either. In fact, what I want to do is I want to actually remove a lot of this stuff and just send the stream on. Okay, this should be fun. This should be fun. Let's restart the server. And let's refresh this. And now when we go to /JSON, no. Okay. Class client not found. Oh, that's right. I need to actually bring some of those imports in. So I'll copy all of these and override all of these. Let's try again. Okay. So memory stream get length is not defined. Okay, what I think I'm going to have to do is kind of non-performant. It's to get one kind of response stream which isn't compatible with just dumping it straight into a response. To write from the one, to cache the content of the whole stream, write that to another one that is compatible with this, and then return a response. It's kind of really inefficient, but anyway. We'll see how the performance drops, and we'll try and improve and improve and improve. Okay. So, where is that even? That's going to a completely different URL. Sorry whose ever website that is. Let's just put this here. That should be better. Okay, back here. Okay, so this is the original API at 8010. This is the proxy API. Okay, so it's still really fast, but it's requesting to a local server, right? Let's check this performance. Oh, I'm calling the root route. What I want to do is JSON. Now this is interesting because it's doing a concurrency of 100 and making an HTTP request, creating a client, making an HTTP request, waiting for the response of that, copying from one stream to another, and then returning a response to the browser. So it's doing a lot more work, right? It's doing file I/O, network I/O for each request at a really high concurrency. But it's not falling over. I mean, that's cool. The performance is going to be much worse than it was previously. But previously it wasn't doing anything interesting. Now it's at least doing something interesting. Wow, it's taking a really long time. Okay, I'm just going to stop it short. So it's gone down from 550 to 172. But that's making a new request every time. And the one failed request is because I Control-C'd it. It also did time per request. So it went up from 50%. Let's see. What were those requests a second? That was the homepage. Okay, so 550 requests a second. This was just after adding the router, with 50% getting 162 milliseconds or less, and it went to 172. So that's like roughly a third, roughly a third, with 50% of the requests taking 440 milliseconds or less. It's not the worst, considering it's making a full HTTP request and basically passing the response to that. Well, sort of passing the response to that. That's doing something a little bit more interesting. But when you think about it, sometimes it's good to take breaks. So I'm going to take a break. I'll be right back. 2 minutes, 2 minutes.